of this. So we begin in the Chumash on page 884, 885, where the Torah begins, of course, as an introduction to the Jewish people arriving in the land. Before they can come in, we need to know what the rules are going to be. So the pasuk tells us at the top of page 884, La'ela techalek haaretz benachla b'mispar shemos. Hashem tells Moshe, it is to these people that you are going to divide up the land in their inheritance, b'mispar shemos, by the number of their names. Meaning, we had just counted the Jewish people, and these people were going to be the ones to whom the land was going to be divided to. Larav, to those who are many, tar benachlaso, you will increase their portion in the land. V'lama'at, and to those who are few, tamit nachlaso, you should lessen their inheritance. What does that mean? Ish lefi pikudav yutan nachlaso. Each person, according to his count, you should give him a portion in the land. However, ach begorol yechalek ha'aretz, it should be divided up by gorol, by lottery. Lishmos matos avosam yinchalu, by the names of the tribes of their forefathers, it should be inherited. What does that mean? Al pi agorol tachalek nachlaso, the gorol will divide the land. Bein rav lema'at, whether they are many or few, which is difficult because that sounds like it doesn't matter what their numbers are. The gorol is just going to give. And also, there seems to be this contradiction between whether the gorol, whether it's going to be divided up to these people or based on the tribes in general. So Rashi fills us in. We're going to read a lot of Rashi now, because I know we're trying to get through Pshat, Remez, Drush, and Sod tonight, if we can get to all four. But just a simple understanding of the Pshat of these verses requires some concentration and focus. So let's just try to get at least Rashi clear. We'll see where we can go from there. We're not going to read all the Rashis, but some of them. La'ela techalek aretz. Actually, let me just translate the Rashis. You can read them inside if you want. La'ela, to these, as opposed to, says Rashi, those who are less than 20 years old, even though they reach the age of 20 by the time the land is divided. In other words, the land is not going to be divided, and it took 7 years to conquer the land, and it would take 7 years after that to divide up the land. But before you even get into the land, you've got a few months from sometime after Aaron died, which would be in the month of Av, until Moshe would pass in the month of Adar. So this parsha of Nachlos is given somewhere at that time, and we're talking here after the story of Zimri, whenever that happened. So you're talking closer to the end of the year. So you've got a number of months plus 14 more years until the land is fully divided. Anyone who turns 20 during that time is not going to get a portion in the land. It's only whoever is 20 at the time of this count.
So even if they're 34, they can be 34 by the time.
Right. They can be in their 30s and be considered a child relative to the inheritance of the land. So, says Rashi, for 7 years they conquered and 7 years they divided. They did not get a portion in the land, only these 601,000. And if one of these 601,000 would have 6 children, they would have to divide the portion of their father amongst them, meaning that they would all get 1/6 of a portion, even though they are adults, because at this time right now is when we've locked in the people who are going to inherit the land. How does that make sense? How is that just? Why should it be that at this random particular count we should decide who should be what? Hopefully we'll get to the secrets of this later, but let's just get through the pshat. Rashi continues, to those who are great, you should increase their portion, meaning to a tribe that was greater in number, they will get a larger portion. Even though the portions themselves are not equal, based on the sizes of on the size of the tribe, but this was done through a lottery. And the lottery, continues Rashi, was Ruach HaKodesh. In general, a lottery is a goral, if done properly according to halacha, is considered to be halachically significant and valid because it comes with the divine support. Not only that, but Rashi fills us in that this was no plain goral. You had Elazar the Kohen, who was the Kohen Gadol at that time, would put on the Kohen Gadol's clothing and have the Urim V'Tumim, and he would then announce, before the lottery was drawn, he would say, this is what's going to come out in the lottery, the following tribe and the following boundary. And the 12 tribes were written on 12 lots, and then the 12 boundaries were on 12 lots, and they mixed it up, and the Nasi of each tribe would pull it out, and they would pull it out exactly as Elazar had described it would happen. In other words, we want everyone to realize the miracle of this, because he called 12 out of 12 portions. Right? The land was divided up into 12 pieces, and then he called out, he says, the lottery is going to come out this one, for this one, for this one, for this one, and they pulled it out, and it came out exactly as he would describe, making it very clear to everyone that this was through divine intervention. Furthermore, says Rashi, the lot itself, that piece of cardboard, which didn't exist then, which they would pull out, that would call out itself and say, I am Hufflepuff. It would give each one, it would be a sorting box, which would tell everyone exactly what portion of the land they get. Says Rashi at the end, but by the way, please, you look at the portions of the land and you'll go, who cut up this land this way? Look at this tribe with this huge amount of land. Look at this tribe. You'll say it's not fair. Says Rashi, please don't go in judgment like that. The land was not divided b'midah, based on area itself, because there are some portions of land better than other portions. Rather, it is by value. A bad base kur could match a good saw. It was all based on value. Meaning, at the time that the Jews come into the land was divided up so that each tribe got the equivalent real estate value, but not necessarily the same size land.
Was it up to the tribes then to subdivide it according to the family?
No, that would also be done by lottery. Okay. Then Rashi continues that these lands were divided, and we said this very difficult verse, by the lishmos matos avosam, by the names of their fathers' tribes. Now listen to this, because if you miss this, it'll sound like gibberish. This is a really complicated concept. Anyone who's been learning Daf Yomi, this will be very easy for you, because Daf Yomi actually went through this section right now. But lishmos matos avosam, it was divided liyotzei Mitzrayim, to those who left Egypt. What does that mean? So, this is the strangest form of division that you have ever heard. Says Rashi, this inheritance is different than any other inheritance in the Torah. Throughout all of the Torah, living people inherit dead people. Here, the dead inherit the living. What does this mean? Now listen to this, because it's going to get really complicated. Two brothers who left Egypt, who had children when they arrived in the land. These two brothers who died. One of the brothers had one child, and the other brother had 3 children. So, how many portions in the land should they get? Total, 4. Because there were 4 people who entered the land. 4 people at the count in Parshas Pinchas. Then, you take these 4 portions and send it back to their fathers as a total of 4 portions to the 2 men who left Egypt. And then these 4 portions would be divided equally amongst these 2 brothers, and who would then have their children inherit it. Let me say that again. Wow. All right. Okay, so what we have here is you have two people who left Egypt. Let's call them Reuven and Shimon. Reuven has 3 sons. Shimon has only 1. Now, if we didn't know what this Rashi said, we would have assumed that when they arrive in the land, it doesn't matter who Reuven and Shimon are, right? We just look at the people who come into the land, which is that Reuven and Shimon. Reuven had 3 sons, Shimon had 1 son, so that's 4 people entering the land. These 4 people, each one gets a portion in the land. That's a total of 4 portions. So that would be fine up until now. Says Rashi, no, that's not the way it worked. The people who entered the land would, so to speak, earn 4 portions, because there's 4 people. But these 4 portions were then collected and thrown back to their fathers, their 2 fathers, having the 2 fathers collect these 2 portions, which means the 2 fathers would divide these 4 portions equally to each. And then Reuven, who has 3 sons, his 3 sons, who actually sent 3 portions back up to the grandfathers, would actually only end up getting 2 portions. So those 3 would get 2, and the 1 would get 2. Why? And then Rashi says, what this is basically, it's the dead, those who left Egypt, are inheriting the land from the living who are entering, and then re-submitting it to their grandchildren equally. How does that make sense? Why would we have such a system? Said, had we originally divided to those who left Egypt, then there would only be 2 total portions, not 4. But the 4 people who enter create 4 portions, which are then sent up to their fathers as 4 portions given to 2. Those 2 return those 4 portions, 2 to the 3 and 2 to the 1.
So is this because the people who have left Egypt, those who actually physically left Egypt, were originally meant before the sin of the spies to come into the land?
Right. It does.
So the land had
Right. It does seem that way, but yet somehow we're refusing to divide it equally among them. But this system seems so strange to give it to those who enter, and then those who enter throw it back to those who left Egypt, and then those who left Egypt then throw it back again in a different format to those who enter.
It's keeping full employment with the accountants.
Yes. This is the idea. I don't know if the American accounting system has such a complicated perspective.
Let's say they have a 3rd brother, and the 3rd brother had 3 sons.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, because there's only 2 people who we are looking at now. The people who left and the people who enter.
Okay, so the 3rd brother who's alive and make it to the land, right?
Right?
It doesn't matter how many children he has, he's going to get 1 portion.
He's only going to get 1 portion,
And his children?
and his children are going to inherit from him.
Okay.
Right? Now, if any of the children are 20 at this count, they might get their own piece of land, which would then be thrown back up and brought down again. Strange system. What would be a reason why we would divide the land in such a complex manner?
Wait, when he was asking about a 3rd brother, why wouldn't it be his 3 portions would be accounted with the other 4? So it'd be 7 now divided up among 3.
Well, if again you have Reuven and Shimon, Reuven had 3 sons, Shimon had 1 son.
And maybe,
Right. Now, if Reuven's 3rd son
yeah,
has a son, so if that son is 20 at this time of this count, then Reuven actually gets 4 portions in his family, not 3. So you would have a total of 5 portions.
I thought what he meant was, Danny, did you mean another brother from the original ones who left
Yes.
Mitzrayim? Okay, so he means there were 3 brothers who left Mitzrayim.
Okay, 3 brothers who left
One
Mitzrayim.
had 1 son, one had 3 sons, and one had 3
3
sons.
sons, but he makes it to the land.
None of those made it to the land. That's the
Well,
point.
some people made it.
No, none of the men, except the next pasuk, is except for Yeshua and Caliph. But Rashi deals with that. Yeshua and Caliph are an exception. But otherwise, none of them make it to the land. That's the whole point. But yet somehow we're pretending, at least when it comes to this, as if they're in the land.
So this would have been 7 portions divided among 3, right?
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
you'd have to throw it back to since the inheritance went first to the men and not the women, wouldn't you have to throw it back so that the women who are coming into the land, maybe not yet married, but also
Well, that's what we're going to see. This is why women end up inheriting. We'll see.
Yeah.
Because if we're only going to look at those who enter Egypt, why will the daughters of Tzlafcha get anything?
Exactly.
They're getting it from Slavchad, because.
But he's not coming into the land, so why is he?
No, but it's
Right,
going
so
to
that's
come
the
back.
reason why they're going to end up getting something. But we'll get to the daughters of Tzlafcha soon. Yeah, so this whole system is almost a setup for the daughters of Tzlafcha coming and saying, well, one second, where is our father's portion going? Right, we'll get to that in just a little bit. Okay. Furthermore, we're going to skip ahead a little bit in Rashi. Rashi says, on page 886, that after Moshe gives this complex system for inheritance, the daughters of Tzlafchad, the sons of Chefer, the sons of Gilad, the son of Machir, the son of Menashe, who is the son of Yosef, show up. What a lengthy accounting of their lineage, right? And then he gives their names, and they stand before Moshe and before Elazar the Kohen, and they say, Avinu meis bamidbar. Our father, he died in the wilderness, and he was not amongst the people of Korach, ki becheto meis. He died of his own sin, and he didn't have any sons. What then? And then they bring an interesting argument. Why should our father's name be lost from amongst the family? Which is fascinating, because they didn't say, why should girls not have the same chance to inherit? They weren't even raising that issue. They were saying, what about our father's name? And how are they going to maintain their father's name? Well, what are they going to do? If they get married, it's going to be lost anyway. Or go to a different tribe.
They can keep their maiden name, just like I did.
Right? No, they could, but they didn't have last names then, right? Right? So he has no son. So give us an inheritance, the language, amongst the brothers of our father.
They don't have brothers.
He had brothers. Tzlafchad
Oh, I
had
see. They're
brothers.
head uncles.
But that's because that's where it went. If you
Right.
don't have sons, then it
Those
goes
are
to the brothers.
Right.
Father's brothers.
Yeah, but they're saying give us an inheritance amongst them, not instead of them.
Right, amongst them, because, again, it's going back to the
But
portion.
Tzlafchad is one of the ones who left. So the Gemara, this is really complicated. There's
The
like
ones who left.
many. Tzlafchad left Mitzrayim. So they should get their father's portion, not their father's portion amongst his brothers. Unless you say that Chefer, Tzlafchad's father, also left, which means they end up asking for 3 portions, according to one opinion in the Gemara each. Okay, so now we're going to avoid all the technicalities here, because if you want brilliant real estate law, see Masechtas Bava Basra. We're going to focus more on the Pshat and the Psukim.
But Slavchad had brothers, and those brothers would have been, the portion would have been divided up among his brothers and him, correct?
Whose portion? Their father's portion.
Their father's portion.
Right, but we don't know that there was a father's portion at all. Right? Up at this point, you read, it sounds like they want their father's portion of leaving Egypt, not their father's portion of his inheritance of his father.
Well, right, I mean, we don't know about his father, but Slavchad's brothers, just like we said, these 2 brothers, and then it went down, like, the children.
But who left Egypt? Tzlafchad. So if Tzlafchad left Egypt, he gets whatever his children get, bounce back up to him and get divided equally. So his brothers should have no right to what he inherited.
But it
So-
goes back up with his brothers, like, whatever his
No,
brothers,
no,
and he, okay, first it goes.
That's for them to get his father's portion goes back up to his brothers.
He because he's already dead, he's only gonna get the portion his children would get.
Right.
Right.
So when he has
So
no sons,
it bounces up to him, not to his brothers. But what's true is that Chefer, Tzlafchad's father, also left Egypt. So this Tzlafchad and Chefer, and Tzlafchad is a Bechor, possibly, which means he gets a double portion. He gets 2 portions, and that gets thrown up to Chefer. This is really complicated again. We're avoiding pages and pages and pages in the Gemara, trying to figure out exactly what the number would be that the daughters of Tzlafchad were asking for.
And
So
this
if
was
a
such
fa-
a hard question that Moshe had to go directly to God about it.
Right.
So
Right.
if a father and a son both left Egypt, then the children of
The children of person 2, meaning generation 3,
Right.
are going to inherit their amounts, which are then going to be bounced back up to both father and grandfather, and then it's going to then be disseminated again from father to his children and from grandfather to all his children. It's really, really, yeah.
Wait, does it bounce back up to the grandfather first, who then sends it back down to father, who sends it back?
So
down
this
to
is all discussed in the Gemara. Yeah, it gets really, really complicated. We're avoiding all that. Okay. But what's with the introduction? Our father died in the wilderness, says Rashi, because they're about to say our father died because of his sin, so they had to clarify that he didn't die with the people of Korach. Rather, he died of his own sin, and he didn't cause anyone else to sin, which leads to a debate as to which sin he was. According to one opinion, he was the Mekoshesh Eitzim, the man who gathered the wood and was killed. According to another opinion, he was from the Ma'afilim, which is that group of people mentioned in Pasha Shalach. After the spies, Moshe said, you guys are not going up to the land. A few people said, oh yeah, well, we're going to go anyway, and they went straight up to the land and they were killed. So he was either one of those two.
Except it says Bechato Levado. So
that's the proof that it was the Mekoshesh. Yeah, this is also a discussion in the Gemara. It's all, but the question is, why are they mentioning at all? This is the Ramban's question, not my question. The Ramban asks on Rashi's Pshat. He says, why are they even bringing up that their father, how their father died? What does it matter? 600,000 plus people just died, and now they're going to inherit them. Why are they getting into the details of how Tzlavcha died? So,
if these were sons, would the question be different?
no, if these were sons, then they would have already been included in what was mentioned before.
If he had been swallowed up, there was no inheritance of those.
So I mean, that's the simple thing right. But then there really is no reason to assume that he did die amongst the people of Korach, that they needed to come to this introduction. And besides, why are they starting off with this, our father died in the wilderness, as if, right, we have, right about now, we've got, we're at the end of the 40 years, everyone has lost someone at this point. Okay. Says the Ramban, a very difficult explanation. He offers some other explanations, but then he speaks from his own interpretation, and he says that they were presenting a case in court of a question not yet dealt with. And as we know, a judge in a case has his own personal feelings in every case, whether he likes it or not. That's part of the human factor of a judge, that a judge will always naturally be influenced. So, what do lawyers and people who come before the judge try to do? Persuade the judge. So, therefore, they start off with this argument of, our father, don't worry, he wasn't from those Korach people, from those bad people who, before they start the case, they're buttering up the judge. Or, as the Ramban says a little differently, that they were concerned that Moshe still harbored animosity towards all those people who gave him a hard time. So either way, whether he was the Mekoshesh or he was from the people, it was nothing personal towards Moshe, and therefore they were hoping to influence, or at least to soften the judge's opinion, which is naturally what people do when they come before the... However, the Torah records this. And why do we need the Torah to record? The Torah doesn't tell us every word. The Torah tells us things that are important to us. So the fact that they said good morning to the judge is not mentioned here. Why does the Torah have to tell us that they were introducing themselves in the most beneficial way that they could think of? So that's a question on the Ramban. So the Orach Chaim takes a little bit of a different approach. The Orach Chaim says that the problem with many people who present a case, which introduces a new case, is that many people, when they present the case, they come with an agenda. And you can hear the agenda in their presentation. There are some people who come to ask the rabbi a question, and they ask the rabbi, I did such and such, the drop of milk fell into the pot, what's the halacha, what can I do? Generally, questions like that will just be factual. It'll be, here's what happened, what do I do? But then, when you get into questions that involve people's feelings and emotions, I hope no one is emotionally connected to whether dinner is ready or not. To a certain extent, you understand if it's not kosher, it's not kosher. But when we get into cases of inheritance, when we get into questions of when the person starts off speaking to the judge, they don't say, here's the situation, what should we do? They say, I've got a real problem with my sibling, the scoundrel who's trying to rob me of my money. That's how you start, because you've already got an agenda. And even if you don't use those words, but there's an agenda involved. So it says the Orach Chaim that they wanted to reassure Moshe Rabbeinu. And so they started off with, we want you to know that we are not going to challenge whatever you say. We learned from our father's mistake. He sinned and he transgressed whatever he did. We recognize that and know our place. We just want to know the law. So therefore, they're starting off with the guilt of their father as an introduction to clarify that they are coming here objectively. Here's the situation. They are seemingly the only such example mentioned, for sure, of people for whom there is no one to inherit the land, what should be done with our father's portion. And somehow that's meant to be understood that you, Moshe, whatever you say, we're going to accept that. We just want to know the law because it hasn't been addressed by anything mentioned previously.
They could not possibly have been the only.
Well, actually, it is pretty likely because if you think about the way that they were having children at the end of Egypt, and it's those children who would be... they were having 6 at a time, so there were a lot of children. So for any family to not have boys would have been, no, it's strange. He only has 5 daughters, so what happened?
But isn't the answer that Moshe gets from Hashem stated more generally?
It is. In other words, there might have been some other examples, but it wasn't so common that we would have. It's just, these were the 5 girls who came forward. Okay, the Kliyakar has an entirely different, very fascinating approach. Based on Rashi in Pasuk Aleph. Rashi says that Rashi is trying to explain why the verse traces the lineage of the daughters of Tzalafchad from Chefer to Gila to Machir to Menashe all the way back to Yosef. I think Menashe would have been enough because that's the tribe. The tribe is Menashe. It was divided. Menashe and Ephraim had different sections of the land. Says Rashi, to teach you that Yosef showed love for the land, as he says, take up my bones, which is interesting that Yosef has that love for the land, but okay. And that's why somehow his daughters or his granddaughters were the ones who loved the land so much, and they're asking for a portion. Which means we're understanding that the expression of the daughters of Tzalafchad is them showing love for the land. One could argue, hopefully we'll have time to resolve this, one could argue it's not love for the land, they want a piece of the pie. So how is this showing love for the land? Anyway, and this teaches you that they were all righteous, and Rashi continues on with this explanation. So it says the Kliyakar. We find earlier in the pasuk, it says, when it lists the 601,000 people, it says, Ube'ela amongst these, Lo haya ish mipkude Moshe v'Aaron, there was not one man from amongst those counted in the first count originally when they left, except for Kalev and Yoshua. Because of these, all of them died and none remained. And the Torah says, "V'lo nosar mehem ish." Says the Kli Yakar that this was true of all the men, but not of the women. He says the women did not suffer the punishment of dying in the wilderness like the men did. Says the Kli Yakar, why would that be so? He gives two reasons for this. The first reason is, the Kli Yakar explains, is that the men who left Egypt were prutzim ba'arayos. They were open to immorality. And he says, and he proves this from different sources, we're not going to get into the sources, and Eretz Yisrael can't handle people, can't tolerate immorality. In fact, the Torah tells us at the end of where the Torah discusses the laws of immorality, it says, don't do these things because the land will spit you out. So says the Kli Yakar, the men of that generation, they were an immoral group, while the women of that generation were Gedurim Ba'arayos. They were holy in that area, as we find that there was only one woman who had a relationship with an Egyptian man, and the Torah lists her as Shlomis Bas Divri, and the Torah shames her because she was the only one of the hundreds of thousands of wives. Not one of them had any incident with an Egyptian except for that one whom the Torah lists, and therefore, says the Kli Yakar, the women were more moral than the men, and therefore they did not suffer the fate of the men. That's the first explanation of the Kli Yakar. The second explanation he gives is a fascinating one. He says, and I don't know what the source for this is, I'll just repeat to you what he says. He says that in Egypt, the land is sustained through the work of man. The Nile would rise, people dug ditches, they had to carry the water, bring it to their lands. It was basically all man. Now, obviously, God provided the water and the sun and everything else that was there, but it was human work. Says the Kli Yakar, I don't know what the source for this is, because in those places like Egypt, because man really puts in that much of the effort, therefore, man deserves his portion in the land and doesn't have to share it with others. And that's why Chutz La'aretz is not obligated in Truma and Meiser. Incredible. But Eretz Yisrael is sustained by the rain. When the rain comes, there is food. When there is no rain, there is starvation. Today, we've tried to come up with new systems. You know, they're dragging icebergs from the Antarctic. Or shipping in water from Turkey, all these things that they're trying to do. But Eretz Yisrael, certainly in biblical times, was sustained and controlled by Hashem. So as much effort as you put in, you don't have to do the irrigation. Hashem did all the irrigation. Says Hashem, the land is partially yours, partially mine. I want my part to go to the Kohanim, to the Leviim, to the poor, etc. And even that is a smaller portion. So you give 2% to Truma, and then 10% to Meiser Rishon, and then 10% to Meiser Ani, or to Meiser Sheni, whatever the case may be. And again, where this idea comes from, that the Kli Yakar is suggesting that because Chutz La'aretz is more effort on the part of man, God did not require us to give away tithings, but because Eretz Yisrael is sustained by God, and God does part of the farming, so he wants some of that to go to Kohanim and Leviim. What about areas in the world that have a similar kind of climate? Obviously we wouldn't, but that's what the Kli Yakar says. So he says, the men didn't want to go into the land because they couldn't handle the fact that when they worked the land, they would have to give a portion away. To Kohanim, to Leviim, to all that. And that's why, and he says, this is why the men were complaining. Zacharnu es hadaga shenochal b'Mitzrayim. We remember the fish that we used to eat in Egypt, chinam, for free. So, what do you mean for free? They were slaves. What were they eating for free? It says chinam means that when I got my piece of fish, it was my piece of fish. I might have gotten it as a slave and someone threw the piece of fish in my face, but it was my piece of fish, I got to eat it. This new idea, when I get something, I have to give it away to someone else. I'm starting to read in the Torah, I have to give to him, Peah, Leket, Shikha, Truma, Meiser, Chala, Reishas Hagez, the first shearings, the first this. But what am I going to be left with? They did not want Eretz Yisrael because they weren't interested in these laws. That's what the Kli Yakar says.
Where does he get that from?
Kli Yakar.
I thought it was because the women didn't participate in the Lashon Hara about the...
No, it seems that they were complaining there too. But yeah, that's this is the Kli Yakar.
They did not participate in the
In the Egel,
also,
that for sure in the Egel.
also the Meraglim.
It's not so clear about the Meraglim, whether or not they were complaining afterwards. But anyway, he says the women came and asked, and the daughters of Tzalafchad, they were asking, Tana lanu achuza b'sochache avinu, we want a portion in the land, meaning they were saying they were wrong for not wanting the land, we do want a portion in the land. The women expressed only love for Eretz Yisrael. So he says, it turns out, it's an interesting thing, he says that the women, especially he says with the mitzvah of chala, which is certainly the woman's portion in her giving of gifts, he says the women, they were ohev tzedakos. They did feel like it was a good thing, that when you have a piece of land, you should share it with others. So says the Kli Yakar brilliantly, that's why we trace them back to Yosef, because what are the two greatest things that Yosef ever did? Number one, he was girded in the area of immorality he did not do, so that's the first thing that the women were as opposed to the men. And secondly, he sustained the whole world through his giving of the storage of the food and then providing for the world. So he says that's why we trace them back to Yosef, because they too were moral, as were all the women who left Egypt, and they were ohev tzedakahs. They did want to sustain those who didn't have.
So if he's right, the people who entered the land were almost all women.
So there was an overwhelming amount of women, yeah. But very few of them would inherit, only the ones who their father who left Egypt had no
There
portion.
would be older women, the generation would be.
Right.
So where did they live? They go with their son?
Yeah, right. They would live on that land. So it's an interesting thing. He doesn't say this, but it could be that that's why they're saying. That's why they're saying our father died in the wilderness. Meaning, our father was amongst those people who had to die because he wasn't following these. So they were saying that we understand why they died, and we're not like that. Give us a portion in the land, and we'll show you how we can deserve and earn the right to live in the land in a moral state of living, and as people who welcome the opportunity to give tithings and to support those who don't have.
So then the sin doesn't have to be any special sin. It could be just the general sin of all the men. So
Right.
The sin meaning.
Right. And then you could tie it in, well, how did he be from Korach, how would that affect the things, etc. But I want to get to the secret of all this, and hopefully I have time to get through all of this. The Mar V'Shamish asks, why is it that Moshe was unable to answer this question? What was missing from Moshe? And there are some commentaries who say that he actually did know the law, but he felt that people would accuse him of some kind of bias, and so he removed himself from the case.
Well, he'd been buttered up.
Well, maybe, right? But in general, the Mar V'Shamish says, what is with this strange system where we divide the land to those who went out of Egypt, and it goes back to, and it goes forward? He says, not only that, but when you do it like this, you actually mess up the system. Because I'm going to say it like this. Let's say you had two people who left Egypt. one of those ends up having one child who has one child for a total of 2 people, and the other one who has 10 children, who each have 10 children for 100 people, the 100 people are going to get the same amount as the 2 people. Says, how is that fitting? So he takes us into a subject we've discussed a number of times, but this is all from a Kabbalistic perspective. God created the world. And in the world, he made it a broken world. We call this the shattering of the vessels, which allowed all these sparks of holiness to spread all over the world. That's the breaking of the world. God made a world like someone who builds a puzzle and then breaks it into pieces and tells you to put it together. Unless you've seen it whole, you won't be able to put it back together. You need the box. Trying to do a jigsaw puzzle without the box doesn't quite work.
Is there an analogy to Moshe's breaking of the tablets?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, the Torah ends with Le'enei Kol Yisrael, which Rashi says is the shattering of the Luchos, and then the next thing we read in the Torah is Bereshis Bara Elokim. It's all tied in. I wish we had time to go there. But the world was broken, and all these sparks of holiness are embedded within the world. And we, through our service, through our avodah, that we've discussed this before, I wish we had more time to get into it. The avos, this was all created and made worse by the Adam and his sin, and the flood, and the dispersion, and Sodom. But the avos, our forefathers, began to fix the process. They began to collect all these sparks. They began to elevate and fix the world, and separate the confusion of Tov and Ra, of good and evil. But, as we know, they didn't complete their task. This process would not be completed until the Jewish people left Egypt, in theory, with the potential for 600,000 sparks, thereby fixing the world. They go straight to Har Sinai, get the Torah, don't pass go directly to Eretz Yisrael, and they lived happily ever after. Except, we sinned in the wilderness. Through that process of the sin in the wilderness, we redispersed all those sparks throughout the world.
Even the ones from Egypt?
Even the ones from Egypt. A lot of it was shattered and broken and scattered, much like the shattering of the Luchos.
So, but the ones from Egypt never went back to Egypt, because
Right. Nothing was in Egypt. Right. Egypt was fixed, and there are those who argue that eventually some sparks do make their way back to Egypt, which is why Jews eventually do have to travel back to Egypt. Another discussion. However, the plan was, when we arrive in Eretz Yisrael, we build the Beis Hamikdash. We don't need to go anywhere. You know how in the Beis Hamikdash, from all over the world, people would come to see? There were signs, up till here Gentiles can go. They had tours. We welcomed Gentiles to come and view the Beis Hamikdash. We welcomed offerings of animals. Any Gentile can come with an animal, if it's kosher and everything, and we will take this guy, and we will take his offering and bring it up on the altar. That kind of open-mindedness still doesn't exist. We were like that because we understood we're not just here for ourselves. We are here for the whole world. And so,
Be the priests for the rest
exactly.
of
And so we take their, but part of what we're doing is we are elevating the sparks that exist in the whole world, because the sparks come to us. The Beis Hamikdash, it's not nice to use this analogy on the Beis Hamikdash, but it's like the antenna, or the magnet, through which everything is drawn. If you had a spark in you, somehow it would make its way to the Beis Hamikdash. And sometimes it would come as a person, and that person would become a ger. But most of the time, it came in the form of domem tzomeach chai, and sometimes medaber. But domem, tzomeach, and chai is the inanimate, vegetative, and the animal world. And that's where the sparks are. Says the Mavar Shamish, this is why we have mitzvos for our clothing. We have mitzvos for a house. Put a mezuzah on the door. Everything has a mitzvah, because by behaving with holiness with everything in our lives, we elevate everything to a higher plane, and we slowly, spark by spark, fix the world. The higher, however, something is, so when something moves from inanimate to vegetative. It's now been slightly elevated. Now there's more mitzvahs involving vegetables than there are inanimate objects. Right? Not crossbreeding things and brachas when you eat it, and you can't eat from a tree the first 3 years. There's lots of laws. But that's not as many as the laws for when it becomes animal. Now it's in an even higher state and more difficult to fix. Now if you want to elevate it, you need shchita, you have to shecht it and slaughter it and remove the blood and the prohibited things and the gidanasha, and then you have to check the lungs and all these kinds of things, because you have to do everything perfectly in order to elevate it. Even more difficult is if you're trying to elevate a human being. There's a whole process for how someone becomes a ger, and usually that comes with some struggles. He says, this is why you'll find that the certain tzaddikim who have 10,000 chassidim, 10,000 students, then you have another rabbi who has barely any, he might be holier than the other guy. You might have a Rosh Hashiva with only 20 students, when he might be a bigger Talmud Chacham than this other Rosh Hashiva with 10,000 students. How does this happen? So says the Morav HaShamash, an incredible concept. He says that there are these specific souls that are connected to certain sparks. And those sparks are drawn to that soul. And so people are drawn to, naturally, to the areas where, even if they don't know it, they have the potential of being elevated and lifted up by their soul. There is a natural tendency for that, and that's why you'll have this, I'll use the example of this Rebbe, you'll have this Hasidic Rebbe who doesn't seem to be like, he's holy, he's a big Talmud Chacham, but he's not like that other one. But somehow he has 100,000 Hasidim. Why? Because his soul is connected to these people in that way where he's able to elevate them.
Is this through the spark somehow? Or
Right.
what is it?
Meaning that their souls as they are, and the souls and the sparks that they're connected to, within that system, his soul is connected to the sparks which is within their realm to fix. And he has the opportunity to elevate them, to put them in that place of mind where they properly, so therefore you'll find rich people will connect to a certain person, to a certain leader, while poor people might connect to another leader differently. It's not just because he's good at talking to rich people and he isn't, but it's also because somehow he has the tools on how to motivate and inspire someone who has a big house to elevate their sparks.
So the imbalance in the land is due
Oh, well, we'll get to the land in a minute. That's where he's going to go. But he says that this is why some people are wealthier than other people. Some people, the reason why you got that painting on your wall is because somehow that fits in within your general system of the sparks that you're supposed to elevate. Everything you do is now holy in terms of fixing the world. In fact, fixing the world is not tikkun olam by making a donation to save the whales. You are going to fix the world by making your home adorned with this drop of ink and that drop of watercolor and that random thing that you picked up in an old antique shop. You think you picked that up and you liked it because you like those kinds of antiques? No. Your soul might have been calling to that, saying that there is a spark which if you bring into your home and make your Shabbos home look nicer through this antique, you've now brought a fixing to the world. It doesn't always work, and sometimes you're just a hoarder, but sometimes that's part of the process for the way it works. An incredible concept. So he says, exactly what Dr. Appleson was going, was that this is the system for how the land was divided. And so it couldn't be by everyone going to the land and plant a flag somewhere. Because I don't know, I can be drawn, but we can't always tell these things. Maybe I am just looking at some land because I like the richer soil. So we needed a goral. The goral would tell you who it is and where it is, and that you're connected to. This is why it had to be apportioned both to the people who entered the land, who are the carriers of the souls of the 600,000 Jews, the 600,000 sparks. So the 600,000 Jews who leave Egypt they're the ones who are carrying all these sparks, and through them it was dispersed. So basically these people need to elevate the sparks back up to those people and create a fixing of the world in this process, and then the land can be redisseminated to them through this process. That's why, says the Marv Shamish, the land had to be divided up in this way.
So wait, the sparks of the people who left Egypt are no longer in them?
Right. It got dispersed through all their sins. So we're going to fix it without going all over the world, which is what we did because we didn't fix it in Eretz Yisrael because we didn't do the right thing. But had we gone to Eretz Yisrael, from Eretz Yisrael we would have recollected all those sparks of the 600,000 people by the people entering the land. So it would have been the people entering the land collecting, basically back, recollecting, or drawing to themselves the sparks associated with the souls of the 600,000 people who left.
And how did that transfer occur? Just through
the mitzvahs of the land, which they were going to perform, had they performed them properly. So they would have built a Beis Hamikdash that would have drawn the sparks from everywhere. Everything they would have done would have served to elevate the world. Every time the Jews would have been an inspiration to the world, and someone would have brought either an animal or inanimate objects, or when things were shipped, Hashem would make this arrangement. There would be a whole system of how sparks were being drawn towards Eretz Yisrael, and eventually it would all be fixed, and the world would be in a state of peace.
I think I must have misunderstood what sparks were, because I thought they were brought out by, for example, Chabad they go out to different places in the world to bring out the sparks.
Right. So the sparks are connected to, they're aspects of holiness, which are typically connected to souls, to people.
To living
People, well, it's 4 levels. It can be in inanimate, in vegetative, in the animal, and in the people. When it's at the people, it's at its highest stage and just ready to be fixed. So if you can find a Jew who's got this spark within him, and you can put tefillin on him, and have him have this mitzvah, which guarantees him a portion in the world to come, and things like that, you've basically lit that lamp until the whole world is lit up, all 600,000 sparks. But that's part of the process. But they also need to make brachos to elevate the vegetative. They still need to put a mezuzah on their house to elevate the inanimate.
So there's only 600,000 sparks?
Well, it's 600,000 sparks like there are 600,000 Jews. But obviously there's more because it breaks up into parts. But the 600,000 general sparks.
source sparks.
Like
Right.
neshama.
Exactly like neshamas, right. So he says, here was the question that Moshe was asking. This is a Hasidic Rabbi who says this. Can the women of Klal Yisrael play this role on their own? Because they weren't given the same opportunities to do mitzvos, they're not obligated in time-bound mitzvahs, can they perform these things? And that's what Moshe brings before Hashem. And so now the question is, he says, that the Benos Salafchad understand what Moshe's problem is. So, I wouldn't dare to say this, the Morv Shamish says this, so he says it, listen to this pshat. He says, the Benos Salafchad said, oh yeah, that's your question? Watch this. Avinu meis b'midbar. Our father died in the wilderness. He was not in the group of Korach. Why should his name be lost, etc.? Says the Morv Shamish, right in front of Moshe's face, they elevated their father's sparks. They did vidui for him. They confessed his sin. They declared so publicly. They described what he did. They described who he was. And with their words, they elevated the soul of their father. The mitzvahs that we do, we say it should have an aliyah neshama, we make a bracha, we make a l'chaim. These girls, in the presence of Moshe, elevated the sparks of their father. And says the Morv Shamish, Moshe was so blown away by what they had just done. We talk about the Benos Salafchad being chachmanios, that they were so brilliant. What was their brilliance? I mean, they came and complained they wanted a portion of the land. Says Morv Shamish, no. He says, Vayakrev Mishpatan. Mishpatan has a long nun. He says, the nun Sharibina, the 50 gates of wisdom, which Moshe didn't even have access to. Moshe brought their Mishpatan Lifnei Hashem, that long nun, the 50 gates. He says to Hashem, I don't know if you must have seen what just happened. The daughters of Tzalafchad just elevated these sparks. They elevated the soul of their father. And Hashem says, and that's why they say, Lama Yigara Shem Avinu. Why should the name of our father, meaning the role that he has to play? He's one of the 600,000 that left. There are portions of the sparks there, and of course we're capable of doing so. Which fits very well with the Kli Yakar's explanation that in fact they were more fitting to behave and to act with the land. Says the Mar V'Shamish, when they did that, Hashem says, Kain, B'nos Salavcha Dovros, don't you hear what they're saying? You heard that. Nason titelem achuzas nachla. Of course, we're going to give them the land. Vavartas nachlas aviyam lehem. It should go to them because they can play this role. Everyone can play their role. Everyone can do what they need to do to bring a fixing of the land. So, according to this, the reason why they're discussing the sins of their father, unlike we said, they were just trying to make excuse. They were trying to, according to the Mar V'Shamash, the daughters of Tzalafcha demonstrated a great spiritual, maybe even Kabbalistic capacity to accomplish things not just in this realm, but in the upper realms. May we merit that through our performance of mitzvahs, we should bring a fixing to the land, to the whole world as well, and we should see the coming, we still have a few weeks for Mashiach to come so that we don't have to fast on Tisha B'Av. May we all bring this fixing and build the Beis HaMikdash one brick at a time through our mitzvahs. Thank you.
Amen.